Hello and welcome to Hatton Boxing TV. I'm joined today by the boxing author Addy McKinday, written this book Jersey Boy, The Life and Mob Slaying of Frankie DePaula. I'll be speaking to Addy about his reasons for writing this book and his views on boxing in general. Okay, well, Addy, let's start talking about your current book, Jersey Boy, and just why in particular. I mean, he sounds a fantastic character, Frankie DePaula. What made you want to write the book about him?
It was a slowly evolving thing because he fought Dick Tiger in a very phenomenally exciting bout, which was dubbed Ring Magazine's Fight of the Year of 1968. So I knew a bit about him, done a bit of research on him, read about him in Boxing Babylon, a book by the writer Nigel Collins, and his son, that is Frankie DePaula's son, got in touch with me and said he'd like me to write something about his father. And that was initially a book which I couldn't understand because I knew he died at a very early age. And I settled for an article at the time. But the responses, it was an internet article, the responses via East Side Boxing were phenomenal over the years, and gradually it came about that it's about 2006 I made the decision I'd take a stab at it, because he's such a fascinating character and lived in certain circumstances which meant that his story was multi-dimensional. So it didn't just involve the excitement of the boxing ring and the tumult of the boxing ring, but also other factors, the involvement of the Mafia and the sort of unique sort of social beings that the people of New Jersey are.
So much away from the ring. First of all, what did you find out about him as a fighter and his style in the ring, and why he was so loved as a fighter?
As a fighter, he didn't ever get to a really world-class level. Of course, he fought for a world title, but there's a long story behind that, how that came about. But he was a very exciting fighter because he had phenomenal punching power. If you can think about Ingemar Johansson's right hand, Ingo's Bingo, that was what drew the crowds to him. And the boxing career actually come from street fighting. He was a street tough as well, and those elements, along with his handsome featured, rugged Italian heritage, that sort of gave him this certain marketability among people in New Jersey, and spread all over to New England and places like that before he got called to fight in the Garden, Madison Square Garden, the Mecca of boxing.
So do you think his career, I mean, if there wasn't so many out of the ring distractions, do you think his career could have gone a lot further with everything that happened to him?
Yeah, I think so, because he's said to have been a remarkable athlete. He could do quite a few things. He was good at diving. He could play football in terms of what the Americans call soccer, gridiron. He could really do it all. He was a naturally gifted athlete. But the problem with him was he did not like to train. And of course you can't have it both ways. You know, you can have all the punching power that you might be God-given to possess. You can be have a lot of talent as well, but you've got to put in the hard work. He was not prepared to put in the hard work. So I think even if you look at his fights today, and people can pick up issues and say, well, he was really more of a club fighter level, he left himself open. You can also see certain ways in which he did box. He could attack, he could defend occasionally, he could absorb punishment. I think if he'd only been more serious about it, he'd had more dedication about it, he would have been a good level championship material.
Of course, all these distractions away from the sport. I mean, rumours that his world title fight was fixed, involvement in a heist of copper, the death of his first manager, just going through these. I mean, we said the Mafia links, it just sounds astonishing. I mean, were you aware that you were going to uncover quite as much as you did when you set out to write this book?
Yes, in a sense I did anticipate, and in fact that's what initially made me hold back from researching it, because as you know, the Mafia, secret society, ruthless, and their powers somewhat diminished over the years due to so many factors, one of which is the US government has really focused on them, and they began to come apart from around, say, the 1970s.
So in some ways you were fearful of not digging too much then?
Well, yes, and even if it wasn't me necessarily on the line in every situation, it was the people. Would they be willing to speak to me? Because they are people who, to this day, still have fear in their voices when they tell me about certain things. And although it is quite revealing, that book, and some people wonder, why did you reveal that bit or that name? There was still a number of things I did hold back on, and part of the reason also was to protect certain sources. So that was one aspect. I knew that I would discover or hear things that were pretty shocking, pretty frightening in a sense. But I sort of weighed things up and felt that with the passage of time, a number of these key Mafia players are now dead. They were either murdered themselves or they passed away. I felt that on balance, this was the right time. I must also say that his life, in a sense, was something of a failure, and because of that, and a bitter failure at that, given the fact that he had so much promise about his life, and that was also an area in which I knew that I would have to deal with members of his family. So that was another area I felt, well, there's been a long time. There's a new generation of people who are related to him, and I felt again that was something I felt that, given the passage of time, would make it okay for me to start digging into his life. So
some things you're reluctant to put in, but still a lot of shocking revelations in this book.
Yes.
And I mean, it must have been, it's always a buzz for you to write about them, as much as they're shocking, to actually chronicle exactly what's gone on.
A buzz in terms of
well, as an author and uncovering this incredible story.
Oh, absolutely, because in a sense, one has tread where angels fear to tread in the past. And the other point was, so I made a number of Freedom of Information Act requests. The US government, and uncovered certain files that hadn't been requested for. I spoke to people who would have been terrified of speaking, and I discovered many things. Not all of them are shocking, because this man was a mass of contradictions. You know, we hear about an aspect of him that was bullying, that took drugs. On the other hand, you have somebody who, same measure, was a good friend to a number of people, a lot of people who are loyal to him to this day, who he protected, a man who was who had a rapport with children. He had this infectious charisma, although it wasn't always allied with good use of common sense. So these juxtapositions I found very, very interesting to assemble as an author. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And obviously, I mean, you are a boxing historian, you like the 60s and 70s. Why do you think we've seen the last of these types of boxers? You just don't get those characters now, do you, in modern day boxing? Yeah,
well, I mean, you're not going to get too many more Frankie DePaulas, because he came onto the stage, for instance, when the Italian-American boxer who was a big player in American boxing around the, let's say, from the 1930s to the 1950s. I mean, certainly in the post-war era, you've got names like Rocky Marciano and Rocky Graziano and Joey Giardello, Carmen Basilio. All of these guys, they had this sort of charisma. But I suppose due to social mobility, boxing is the sport of the underclass, etc. And by large measure, American Italians have been assimilated, and many of them have been socially mobile in America since the Second World War. You wouldn't get that kind of vibe, with a unique personality like a Frankie DePaula. Those communities don't exist anymore. It wasn't just his Italian heritage. He came from a particular part of the world, Jersey City. It was mixed with Irish and Italians and people of German and Polish ancestry. They were all Roman Catholic, working class, and so the things that contributed to making his sort of unique personality just doesn't exist anymore. We have to wait and find out. Those other boxers coming up from Eastern Europe or the Far East. It's difficult perhaps for their life circumstances to translate into the Western sphere and sort of capture the imagination here. But I think a lot of people have had fascinating lives who are non-Americans or non-Westerners. But in terms of what you're saying, you're right. It's just not. I don't see the circumstances fostering people like this in the foreseeable future.
And in your view, I mean, having grown up watching boxing in the 70s, Muhammad Ali and everything else, do you feel that boxing is not as popular now as it was then? And what can it do to perhaps get back to that heyday? Difficult one there, because boxing always ebbed and flowed. The heyday in the 1920s with Jack Dempsey, well, there was a kind of a dip, and then you had Joe Louis. And then after Joe Louis went, there was a bit of a dip, and sometimes it had to do with television, other times it might have to do with the recession or whatever it was. By the time Muhammad Ali came, he was reviving an industry that was flagging. So boxing in a way is in the doldrums now. I think the one way to make it, if it's ever going to be as popular as it ever was before, or at least have some measure of a resurgence, it would be to deal with the marketability of the sport in terms of who knows the fighters, and one aspect of that would be simply having more of it on television, because that's how Sugar Ray Leonard and a lot of these guys became famous. I know Marvin Hagler wasn't an overnight success, but at least certainly with Leonard and a lot of fighters, ABC or one of the sports networks would be regularly broadcasting boxing fights. I mean, that in itself can be the roots of the problem, because in the TV age of boxing in the 1950s, you found one of the reasons that boxing was dying in those days was because it was overexposed. Obviously, a balance has to be struck, but if these people the boxers can be made more marketable to the public, and we don't need to go that far. The days of Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank and Michael Watson, I mean, a lot of people knew about them because their fights were there. They were midweek TV and big fights, every other weekend. So that would be the first thing. There are other things that have been suggested by other people. I can't say that I've necessarily thought about it in a very in-depth manner, but seeing the competition from mixed martial arts, some people feel that, well, maybe boxing should be a little bit more compact. Maybe they could fight with shorter rounds, there could be more of these super tournaments, and make it in a way that the other thing that is definitely feasible, apart from making the boxers more apparent to members of the public, is the issue of
putting on competitive bouts. Even when you do manage to get a competitive bout in, say, in a big fight in America, Atlantic City, Las Vegas, the undercards stink. But if you had that competition like it was in the 50s, where you had Joey Giardello versus George Benton, and then either of them would fight Rubin Carter, who would then fight Dick Tiger, well, I think that would be those are the two things that come to me immediately. Make them more visible, bring boxing to the wider public view on free TV, yeah, and the second one, make more competitive matchups. Don't overprotect fighters. And
you can see your eyes light up when you mentioned those names. I know you've done a book about Dick Tiger as well. I mean, you obviously see it really as the heyday of boxing. Yeah. Any more books in the locker? You've done your second one. Are there any more fighters out there that you really want to delve into their backgrounds?
I wonder. I mean, Harold Alderman, great boxing historian, researcher, and based in Kent, and I think he was a bit disappointed when I went for Frankie DePaula, because Harold Alderman is the sort of guy who knows about the struggles of every sort of 19th century English boxer or a West African fighter who migrated to cold England and made something out of their lives. He felt those sorts of people were more deserving, and I always felt that maybe I'd like to do a work on Hogan Kid Bassi, who was a precursor of Dick Tiger, because Hogan Bassi was the first world champion from Nigeria, only the second world champion since Battle in Sike of the 1920s. And although his life wasn't as tumultuous as Dick Tiger, who was involved with the Nigerian Civil War, and Dick Tiger lost his first 4 bouts in Liverpool and then rose from the ashes and then went to America. Bassi was the pioneer, so I think that would definitely be under scrutiny. But my options are open. Yeah.
You've definitely got the bargain, and you want to keep going. You obviously enjoy the research element of finding out so much. So.
Yes, absolutely. I think it doesn't just exist in a vacuum. I think there are quite a few plastic personalities in this world. I mean, I suppose a number of Premiership footballers might have something of interesting lives, but essentially, compared to the days we're referring to, their lifestyles are overly pampered and markedly childish. Really, other than the fact that they were playing at this high level, some of them perhaps undeservedly earning large amounts of money, but they wouldn't really warrant that much interest in terms of their projections of dedication, of what a real I don't want to introduce some sociological debate of notions of masculinity, but you look at the substance of the lives of people like Dick Tiger, and even a man like DePaula and his failings, and it's a totally different situation.
Yeah, certainly they're guys worthy of your scrutiny. Premiership footballers definitely aren't. But thanks very much for joining us today, and fascinating book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Cheers.